its abandonment in 1939. Though only a 7-branch line from Denver, this railroad was extremely profitable in the early days, bringing miners, settlers, and supplies to the mining towns of the region. This continued until 1893 when the Sherman Silver Purchase Act was repealed. The price of silver then dropped so low, mining for it was no longer profitable. The miners therefore upped and left the mine. The railroad was left floundering, wondering what to do in order to stay in business. While the railroad was running how to keep the cash flowing, the fame of the Georgetown Loop had spread around the world as a scenic and engineering marvel of the 19th century. The railroad was able to capitalize on this and began running tourist passenger service up the canyon. It was very fashionable at that time to hop aboard a train down in Denver, ride up over the Georgetown Loop, have a picnic lunch in Silver Plume, and then be back in Denver in time for supper. This was so profitable, in fact, that as many as 7 trains a day departed Denver bound for Silver Plume. Between 1905 and 1918, many passengers ended up continuing their ride aboard the Argentine Central Railroad. The Argentine Central goes south from Silver Plume, up Leavenworth Mountain directly ahead of us, to the town of Waldorf, and then on to the peak of Mount McClellan, an elevation of 13,500 feet. The Argentine Central was extremely steep, having grades exceeding 7%. The only locomotives powerful enough to haul up those steep grades were special Shay-type feeder locomotives. The heavy tourism in this area continued into the early 20th century. However, in the 1920s, America began falling in love with the automobile. Soon enough, people much preferred that mode of transportation over trains. Passenger service on the line began to dwindle. In 1927, it dwindled so much, the Colorado and Southern discontinued passenger service altogether. From then on, they were only running freight trains up and down the canyon, but even that business had begun to dwindle. In 1934, the railroad filed for bankruptcy. As the Great Depression went on, things only got worse for the Colorado and Southern. In 1939, they were completely out of money and filed for abandonment of the line. Between 1939 and 1941, all of the rails from Silver Plume down to the Golden were torn up and sold for scrap. However, you might be wondering, if the railroad was scrapped, how are we riding on it today? Well, in 1958, the Colorado Historical Society began plans to rebuild this portion of the railroad. During that time, however, the Highway Department was building the interstate highways, and in this case, Interstate 70. The original plan was to have I-70 come straight up the valley floor, which would have destroyed all of the rich railroad and mining history that we have to offer. The Historical Society was successful in petitioning the Highway Department to locate Interstate 70 onto the south side of Republican Mountain, where you see it today. Then, in 1973, using materials that were donated by the Union Pacific Railroad, the Society began laying track from Silver Plume down into Georgetown. Narrow-gauge railroad equipment that was already owned by Lindsay and Rosa Ashby was available and operating in Central City. The Ashby's expertise in narrow-gauge train operations, they were able to restore passenger service on the Georgetown Loop in 1975. Then, after nearly a decade of construction and enlisting the help of the U.S. Navy Seabees, the Historical Society completed the reconstructed Devil's Gate High Bridge in 1984, just in time for the railroad's 100th anniversary. The Georgetown Loop Railroad has been in operation every year ever since.